Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume. It is the week of June 16th, and this is your Monday briefing. The next big step for the budget reconciliation bill is text from the Senate Finance Committee, and that may happen later today. Joining me to talk about the latest is Scott McCandless. Scott, great to see you, and thanks for joining.
Sure, good to be with you, Sindhu.
And thanks for joining this early. I know you're on the West Coast. So before we get started, I do want to point out that we are filming at 10 a.m. Eastern, and things may change by the time this episode airs. All right, with that disclaimer out of the way, Scott, what can we expect this week for the Senate Finance Committee's portion of the reconciliation bill?
Sure, great question, Sindhu. And I think that's the $64,000 question, or maybe $64 billion question as we await this text. Remember, the context here is that the Senate is racing the clock to try to get something done before its July 4th recess, and maybe even do something fast enough that allows the House to take up the Senate passed bill and also pass something that could be sent to the president's desk before July 4th. That all seems extraordinary and perhaps overly ambitious, but that seems to be something that they are actually attempting to do. It's incredible, the pace that we're talking about here. In order to achieve that, they have to release certain sections of the bill. Some of the committees have already worked their will. Others are still to come, the Senate Finance Committee among them. Part of the reason they have to do that is so that they can have actual text delivered to the Senate parliamentarian to go through what's called the BYRD process, B-Y-R-D, in honor of a former senator by that name. And they need to make sure that that BYRD process is complete in order to test whether the text complies with the reconciliation rules and therefore can actually go forward for Senate floor consideration. The Senate Finance Committee is one of the committees that still has to put out its work, and it has a huge portion of this bill with both tax and Medicaid-related aspects. And we're hoping to get some of that text today. So one of the big dangers as we head into a day like this is that rumors are flying fast and furious as to what might be in that text. And no one really knows until they do briefings later today, with Senator Crapo, the chairman of the Finance Committee, briefing members today.
Thanks for that. And I think this falls under, we need to wait and see what's in the bill, but I'm going to ask you anyways about the latest on Section 899.
Sure. So the Section 899 changes have received an enormous amount of attention. Remember, this is partly intended as a way to give the United States some armament so that it can go in fully prepared to negotiations with other countries that are seeking to implement some of the OECD projects, Pillar 1, Pillar 2, and so forth, so that the U.S. has some tool with which to impose its will, if it can, and try to get other countries to change direction, maybe even just get some eventual carve-outs or safe harbors or some other potentially attainable goals. But in the meantime, this puts potentially an enormous amount of pressure on inbound companies and other international relations because of the potential tax consequences. It's almost like a tariff, but it's a tax in terms of the way this would work to penalize foreign companies, foreign individuals, foreign governments, and therefore it's receiving an enormous amount of attention. I think the goal here is that even if this is enacted into law, it's something that's never actually triggered, but at the same time, the threat of it is pretty significant. So there's an enormous amount of pressure on Congress. There have been some forces trying to get the Congress to completely eliminate this provision. I'm not sure that's likely. There have been others that want to modify it, for instance, in terms of the deadline, perhaps imposing a less stringent deadline so that it wouldn't kick in at the beginning of 2026, but instead give Treasury some more runway to negotiate with these other countries and find a negotiated solution. And then there's also the pushback from Congress to some of these folks who are lobbying on the issue, trying to get changes for 899, saying, look, why don't you go lobby your home countries and get them to change some of the trajectory that they would otherwise be on as they try to implement Pillar 1 or 2 or both. So it's still a very much live fire exercise, and we're eager to see if there are, in fact, any changes adopted in the Senate version.
All right. And a major point of contention in ongoing tax policy debates has been the 3 TCJA orphans. Walk us through those provisions, if you could, and what the open questions are.
Sure. Yeah. These TCJA orphans, as they become known, are the 3 provisions traveling together that have already changed because of some of the TCJA provisions. They include bonus depreciation, they include the interest deduction limitation, and they include the research expense feature. All 3 of those changed for the worse over the last couple of years. They weren't completely eliminated, but they are no longer as generous as they were. The House passed version of the One Big Beautiful Bill would extend all three of them for 5 years at their more robust earlier features. So in other words, 100% bonus depreciation, full research expensing, at least for domestic expenses, and then putting back the DA and the EBITDA metric against which your interest deduction limitation is measured. So very valuable provisions, something that the business community has wanted. And the Senate is just as eager as the House to see them put back into the law. However, the Senate wants to make them permanent, whereas the House has only given a 5-year extension for these. So that's really where the difference is. And it's not just about a matter of policy. Remember, this could also implicate huge amounts of revenue as they try to figure out just how expensive it would be to make those provisions permanent and whether they would need to change any other provisions in the overall One Big Beautiful Bill in order to make that adjustment. So we're going to have to watch very closely to see if they push for permanence, what that might mean for the score, and whether the House ultimately would be willing to accept that.
All right, and turning to the proposed new building bonus, what do we know so far, and how is this expected to reshape incentives for domestic investment?
Sure, great question. So we mentioned the TCJA orphans, and those three are provisions that were already in law that have changed. There's one brand new provision that the House has added to try to add an even more beneficial aspects to this, to give an adrenaline shot to the economy, if you will, and that is in the form of essentially bonus depreciation for facilities. It would include both new and refurbished facilities. And it is pretty powerful to the extent that you would be taking what might otherwise be 39.5-year depreciable life property and squishing it down into 1 year of expensing, which is a pretty dramatic change. It would be temporary. You would have, I believe, 4 years for begin construction and then 4 years for place in service. So it wouldn't be permanent, but this is an idea that is of a piece with President Trump and the Republicans' larger goal of trying to bring more manufacturing and more production activity to the United States. And it is specifically designed to impact production activity, which seems to be limited to agricultural or chemical activity, but also to manufacturing, which is much more broadly defined. So it is a fairly strong provision. The revenue associated with this is about $120 billion, so one of the larger provisions in the bill, and it is designed to be an economic boost that, when combined with bonus research and the interest deduction limitation changes that we mentioned earlier, could actually be quite consequential.
And turning to another big piece of this is the SALT deduction is also getting a lot of attention in terms of the cap and the income thresholds for phase out. What are the implications here?
Sure. So this is as much about the interplay between the House and Senate politics as it is the actual policy. So as you recall, the House passed One Big Beautiful Bill, would increase the current $10,000 cap to $40,000, but then have a variety of phase outs based on adjusted income levels. It would also have some other changes in there, such as limitations on your ability to take itemized deductions up to the full value of your tax bracket. So there are a few hidden traps in the House version that need to be considered. The Senate, however, does not really share the interest in increasing the $10,000 cap at all. However, this is where the interplay between the two chambers comes in. Now, the big question is whether the Senate will stake out a position that says we don't want to increase the cap, or we don't want to increase it as much as $40,000, knowing that later they might have to change that position before a final floor vote in the Senate so that they don't anger or disrupt the vote calculus in the House. That's a really big issue for them. Or will they just accept it right out of the gate and maybe make some minor changes to the SALT provision that would allow it to get through both the House and the Senate? And that's really the big question. So this is a little bit less about the policy and more about the politics of getting it through the House, making sure that the Republicans who in the House who have said this is a hill that they might want to die on will be satisfied. But at the same time, there are potentially serious revenue consequences as well, depending on how this plays out. So it's less about this specific policy and more about making sure they have a bill that can pass at the end of the day.
Scott, per normal, excellent analysis, excellent insight, and descriptions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
To our audience, as you can imagine, it's going to be a very busy week here in Washington, and we're following the reconciliation bill and process closely, and we'll report back with analysis as developments unfold. And in case you missed it, the latest Week in Review with Rohit Kumar is linked in the description of this episode. Thank you for spending this time with us, and have a great week. Take care.